I'm Daubney. I've done a few webinars here before, and I'm from the University of Sussex, and I'm a music education teacher trainer there. And today I'm with...
Hi, I'm Kirsty Devaney. I'm a composer and a PhD student at BCU in the School of Education. And my PhD is sort of looking at GCSE and A-level composing. So I've been doing loads of stuff in schools, talking to teachers, all about composing at examination level. So I'm really excited to talk about the new GCSEs and sort of what that entails.
So thank you for joining us today. What we're going to be doing is looking at the new music GCSEs and the place of the new music GCSEs, and how these fit kind of overall, and I suppose some similarities and differences between the different qualifications which are currently in the draft phase. One of the progress measures, you probably know this already, but being used in school, apart from the EVAC, which of course excludes music, is the Progress 8 measure, which has got the 3 open groups at the end. And the quite exciting thing is that there are quite a lot of qualifications which you can put in that. So although today we're talking about the GCSE, that's not the whole story. So there are quite a lot of other options included. In fact, I think over 80 with a few different discount codes. So in theory, somebody could fill up their entire open boxes with things which are related to music. So here's a few things which people are using quite a lot. The NCFE, music technology, the Pearson level 1 and 2 BTECs, Cambridge International level 1 and 2 certificates, OCR are just bringing out, and there's a lot of information towards the end of the slides on some links for you, and also the Rock School Music Practitioner Awards. Also, I don't know whether you know or not, but music examination grades, the Associated Board, Rock School and Trinity Guildhall grades 6 to 8 can count in the Progress 8 open category alongside the GCSE, and there's different points for each of those. So today we're going to try and kind of help you unpick each of these different syllabi, not sure, by looking first of all at what Ofqual and the DFE regulatory guidelines are, because there are some givens. So there were some choices which the examination boards had little choice over in essence, and also to look at the key differences to help you kind of understand and decide which of them may be suitable in your specific setting and for your pupils. We've got our own draft specification overview, and the link is on there for you to follow for another time. So the 4 we're talking about are the AQA, the Edexcel Pearson, OCR, and then the Welsh board have now got 2 qualifications. They've got a qualification for Wales and the Eduqas qualification, which is a qualification for England, because in Wales they're keeping the GCSE grading as it is, and of course in England we're changing from the 9 to 1. Some terminology which comes up all the time is about non-examined assessments, and I have to say the first time I heard this phrase I was thinking, I'm a little bit confused about that, but basically what that means is internally assessed, externally moderated, and I'll probably get shot for saying this, but if you like, it's the coursework part. So it's kind of in the sense that you do that now with the GCSE, and it applies to both performing and composing. So we're just going to give you a little overview first of all of the areas of study, because the guidelines from Ofqual and the DFE state that there must be at least 4 areas of study which are studied through the GCSE. And the reason we're drawing these to your attention at the beginning is because sometimes the performing and the composing links to them, so it's kind of useful to have an overview of what they are. Now, you may remember the ISM questionnaire about the debates about the years. We did manage to leave for an extra 60 years. So one of the areas of study has to be the Western classical tradition, with the majority of music composed between now 1650 and 1910 instead of 1700 and 1900. So thank you, ISM, for gathering another 60 years for us. At least one of the other areas of study cannot be drawn from the Western classical tradition, but hopefully that gives you an idea of why these have actually been chosen. So as you can see from these, in terms of the AQA, they've gone for the 4 which are listed: the Western classical tradition since 1910, the Western classical tradition 1650 to 1910, popular music and traditional music. And one of the key differences about the specifications is the extent to which they have chosen or not chosen to incorporate set works. So with the AQA, you can see that under each of the areas, they've got some set works listed, including, for example, as the Daily Mail picked up, 3 Beatles songs, amongst other things. So the Edexcel syllabus has gone for set works, whereas OCR has gone for completely suggested repertoire and no set works. And the Welsh board, the Eduqas, has got a good combination really between some set works and some suggested repertoire. Now with all of the boards, they've also given out a list of suggested repertoire, because one of the givens on the listening paper is that it cannot be exclusively based on set works, which is how the Edexcel one is currently. So the allocation of marks has also changed slightly from the GCSEs, which are currently out until next year. And at the moment, the reason for that is there is flexibility with the examination boards about how they split the marks. But that flexibility has gone with the new GCSE, with Ofqual saying, no, it has to be 30% performing, 30% composing, and then 40%. They've split between the last 2 assessment objectives, which essentially come down to appraising, listening, knowledge. So just for ease, I've used the word appraise on here. But here they are. And so that appraise word splits down into demonstrating and applying musical knowledge, and then using appraising skills to make evaluative and critical judgments about music. So you can see that that's kind of where they are with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by looking at the performing element, which I'm going to look at, and then I'm going to pass over to Kirsty.
And I will look at purely looking at the composing, but like Ali said, some of the composing is directly looks at the set works and the area of study as well, so it does link in quite well in that way.
And we have specifically chosen to talk about the paper aspect at the end, and there's a reason for that, isn't there, Kirsty?
There is, Ali.
Yeah. And the reason for that is that basically we are both of the opinion that this knowledge about music and the knowledge and understanding which students are supposed to be developing is actually kind of comes out from, would you say?
Yeah, so sort of I think it's quite interesting that obviously the exam is at the very end, but throughout the year they hopefully will be composing and performing and really embedding everything that they're learning through practical engagement through performing and composing. And then they have an exam which we will talk through, which is, you know, your standard sort of listening exams, but hopefully they'll have had a really enriched experience before they get to that exam stage and they have to sit in that hour and a half, is it?
Well, they vary in length. That's one of the key differences. Now, before we kick off with the performance part, we would very much like the webinar to be interactive as the others have, and you will notice on your screen that there's a question box. So if you would like to ask a question at any point, then please feel free to write something in the question box. I've already got hello Liverpool Hope here from Mary, so nice to see you, Mary. I know that you can't see each other's questions, but we will definitely try and scoop up the questions as we did before and bring them in at relevant points to what we're talking about. So questions and comments are always welcome. Yeah, please feel free to join in. So we'll kick off talking about performing then, shall we? Okay, so what you've got on the screen at the moment, thank you for joining us, Liam, is the list from Ofqual and the DFE about the technical requirements of the performance assessment, and it tells you a little bit about it. Now, the interesting given on this, that's a kind of key change, I suppose, from before, is that there will be a minimum of 4 minutes for each of the performances, or the portfolio of performances, and the way that that's split up varies between the different board. And the given is that part of that must be an ensemble, but that doesn't mean to say that students still have to perform as a soloist, but they do have to perform as an ensemble, so there's a minimum of 1 minute duration within that. A couple of other key things, that the learner has to take the performing part in the academic year in which they expect to be awarded the qualification. So in other words, usually in their year 11, but it can be at any point in the year. And I spoke to Marie Jones a couple of weeks ago at OCR, the exam board. She's one of the music officers there. And we were talking about the flexibility about gathering that performance, that, you know, performing exams as such aren't necessary in that sense. So the performing requirements, well, the performance can happen in lots of different ways. It can be playing a musical instrument, and that's any musical instrument, singing, improvising, or realising music technology. Now, there's a slight clarification to be made here on the draft specifications, but I think that the position is that 0 marks are awarded if the combined length of the pieces is 3 minutes and 59 seconds. So I figure there might be some extra repeats coming up. Don't know. But that's a key change and something to be certainly aware of. Now, the drafts which we're talking about today, just to be absolutely clear, they haven't yet gone through Ofqual and the regulator. So we're talking about the second iteration of the OCR draft, the Edexcel draft, and the Eduqas draft. But we are talking about the first iteration of the AQA draft. AQA have also resubmitted, and there are some changes, but they weren't able to tell me what that is. So there will probably be slightly more changes to the AQA syllabus than there will to the others. Somebody's just asked a question about the PowerPoint with the presentation. That's definitely going to be available afterwards, and the whole of the webinar will be uploaded with the PowerPoint running alongside it. So, to give you a quick overview of the performing, if you think about what might work for your students, I suppose, in all of this. So at the moment, on the first draft, AQA, and some of the others said this but have changed, so I'm not sure whether this will change. They've said that your 4 minutes must be 1 ensemble piece and 1 solo piece, which is quite different to the others, because the Edexcel Pearson one says at least 1 solo and 1 ensemble piece. So if you've got pieces which are a shorter duration, then you can play more pieces. They've put in an extra requirement. There's a minimum of 1 minute for the solo and a minimum of 1 minute for the ensemble. OCR have said 1 or more solo and 1 or more ensemble. And the difference really is the Welsh board, which says you have to have an ensemble piece. Minimum, there's a mistake there. It shouldn't say 4 minutes, it should say 1 minute. I'll correct that. 2 to 8 people in the ensemble, but then the other 3 minutes can be either solo or ensemble. So whereas the other boards stipulate that you will have a solo and an ensemble, the Welsh board give complete flexibility over that. I'm very sorry for the mistake on that, but I will put that right. So one piece must be linked to an area of study of the choice, which is why I showed you at the beginning. So that's what the Welsh board say. Whereas the others, it's not kind of built in the same way. Apart from OCR, one of their areas of study is called My Music, and so one of their pieces links in with that. We thought about the mechanics of performing. It's got to be an unedited performance, but that doesn't mean to say you have to do them all at the same time and on the same day. What that means is it's exactly the same as now, that you're not allowed to enhance or change anything after the performance has taken place. But we talked about this already, the academic year. It's got to be audio recorded. I'm assuming that it can also be video recorded because it's got the audio on it. Different exam boards ask for different ways of uploading. OCR give you the choice about whether you would like to upload it or to send it in the post, as happens at the moment. Students may perform their own compositions when supported by a score. Now I've got a half sentence there because that's not the same in all, on all of the boards. And you have to hand something in with the performance to give an idea of what you were trying to achieve, and that varies very much between all of the different examination boards.
I'm just going to point out we've got a couple of long questions which I'm trying to read. I'm due a new prescription update, so I'm trying to read. It's very small, but just Emma said that she went onto the Eduqas course today and suggested it was fine to do performances at any point. They said it was fine to collect in year 10, and the Ofqual guidance, has the Ofqual guidance changed? Could you confirm? I don't know, Ali.
So I'm not sure. I'll have to check that out, and I've spoken to all of the exam boards with the questions because what I read was very clear that it had to be during the year 11, and I think that has come from the Ofqual guidance. Right. And AQA have clearly done their launch event since they put out their first draft, because the question here is, I went to the statement, I went to the AQA launch event, they were clear you could record as many pieces as you want to reach the 4 minutes, which is absolutely fine. So in that sense, there is no difference. Thank you very much for that, Claire. Looking at the calculation of the marks, in the AQA, there's some differences in here as well, especially around the way that the Eduqas ones are awarded. So there are 36 marks available for solo and 36 for ensemble for the AQA. It kind of, in a sense, it doesn't matter how many are available, it's the split of the marks. So it's also an even split between solo and ensemble in the Edexcel Pearson and the OCR syllabus. But the WJEC Eduqas says that you divide it by the number of pieces that you've got. So that's quite an interesting way to kind of go about it, and it could necessarily split the balance of the pieces that you have. AQA was very clear that it had to be in year 11, somebody has said, which is good to know because that's basically what I had thought. There's some information and guidance on each of the different boards about scores and lead sheets and what is expected, whether there's a written account if you haven't got a score or a lead sheet, or what the lead sheet might include. And the AQA say you can submit a guide recording, which is great, because certainly in the case of quite a lot of different styles of music, you may not have notation or something else to go on. In the case of the beatboxing, DJing, rapping and MCing, which are also available, so in other words, GCSE is for everybody, it might be possible to provide certain details. And so you would need to look at the different ways in which those are marked, because it's actually slightly different. We're also going to look in a minute at the way that the sequencing is considered, the use of the backing tracks. So thinking first about backing tracks, it seems that backing tracks are okay for solo, but the part played shouldn't be audible or consistently doubled on the recording. That's something that Edexcel were particularly pointed out, so it's something to bear in mind. I know playing along with backing tracks is a very popular way. If you're playing an ensemble, solo with an accompaniment is not acceptable unless you're the accompanist. So if you're playing the flute and I'm playing the piano and I'm being assessed, then it's fine. But if you're being assessed, then it's quite different. 2 independent parts as a minimum, need the part significantly doubled. The Welsh board say between 2 and 8 people, so they're very specific about what that is. So a couple more things I want to talk about. One is about realising using technology. One of the most exciting things I think about the new GCSE is that it was always there actually, but it's kind of become much more obvious and much more to the fore that the use of music technology and the inclusion of music technologists in the sense of performing is actually very acceptable. And so AQA have got very specific technical guidelines that at least one track must be performed live in real time on the solo, and for there's got to be at least 3 parts. And they all state slightly different things about what's actually being assessed. So in the case of Edexcel, it's only the live part that's being assessed. Now, OCR say it can be a sequence recording where the learner programs all the parts. And I have been through that, but can't see on that whether that means that they have to play a part live. So that's something to check out with Marie. And I'm thinking that it's just talking basically about a sequence recording, and that is what's being assessed. So you can see at the bottom here what the Welsh board say about that. And they say basically they can't list everything that can possibly be used. So if you're in doubt, then contact them for advice. But actually there's a huge amount of flexibility. And I think one of the key messages from today is how this qualification actually is for everybody in that sense. Now, something else that may well change from the drafts which are coming out is about the standard and how the level of the piece of work, if you like, I hate the word level because it reminds me of levels, but the standard of the music and how that might be graded and how the marks might then be awarded within the different qualifications. So OCR, let's start with AQA, they say they give 6 marks out of their 36 marks for the standard, the demand, if you like. And they say you get 4 out of 6 if it's a 3, grade 3 standard. 6 out of 6, it's grade 5. If it's below grade 1, you get 1 out of 6. Now, that's quite good in a way, because it means that it's encouraging you to play a piece of music as musically as you can, and not to kind of overstate what you can do and play something that's just too challenging and too difficult, because that's where the marks come from. Actually, it's better to play something that you can play really well, and that's how the marks are awarded. So there are still actually a lot of other marks available to you if that is the case. Edexcel Pearson, they have a standard, a less difficult and a more difficult, and they have a grid where you decide on the raw mark, and then the mark is changed depending on how that is. Somebody's just asked a question. Edexcel has always used the demand descriptors for performance rather than the grade. Actually, the way the grid works is very similar to what they've got at the minute. So you decide if the piece gets 26 out of 30, then that's great, but actually you may have to adjust that to be more difficult or less difficult. So they may end up with less marks if it's a less demanding piece. OCR I've got on the following slide because it's quite confusing. The Welsh board have got easier than standard, and more difficult than standard. Now this is quite interesting, because if you look at what standard is on Edexcel, they say grade 4, and then grade 5 plus, more difficult. The Welsh board says standard level, grade 3 approximately, and then more difficult than standard. So one would assume it's kind of grade 4 plus. So I think there is still a little bit of teasing out to be done here, but it's certainly something that you need to think about very, very carefully when you think about the pupils that you've got. OCR, they give 6 marks for this, and if the difficulty mark doesn't exceed 2, then you can't use the top band of marking for the other one of the other criteria, which means that I'm wondering if you get penalised twice. That's just a question on the marking, really, because basically not all of the marks are available to you, no matter how well you play, and part of that is because of the technical intricacy of the pieces that you may be playing. So again, you need to think very carefully about the pieces that you have. Claire's just put up a comment to say, with Edexcel, the current standard level work is about grade 1 to 2 piano, so is the standard going to be more difficult than previously? Well, basically, it looks like it is. If the Edexcel is saying that standard at the moment is grade 1 to 2, but actually I don't think that's quite right. I think it's actually slightly higher than that. So although one of the things that the DFE were very, very clear about in the stakeholder meetings is that they wanted to raise the standard. I'm not sure it's changing that much, but obviously the benchmark is raising a little. And part of the idea is that children who have got quite a long way or an instrument or in performance in other ways are able to play something to the best of their ability and to be encouraged to do that. So just before I hand over to Kirsty, I've got some things which I think need considering. Basically, this is all about what kind of performances are your students likely to offer? How long will the pieces be, and which set gives your students the best opportunities and chances to succeed? What I mean by that is thinking about whether you've got a lot of children who have classical lessons on things, whether you've got a lot of singers, whether you've got people who are likely to do beatboxing and technology. And so really it's about looking at the specs and thinking with that kind of head on. How can you give the students the best opportunity to succeed? And that's probably not on a fixed examination day. And Marie was quite clear to me when I spoke to the lady from OCR that you can carry, you know, the idea that the pieces can be recorded in any context. Basically, you can take your digital voice and record it out to the punk festival if that's what you need to do to be able to gather them on that day. And also, my next question is, how can you bring in other music educational professionals? Because in your school, you will have probably quite a lot of other people who are visiting or come in and do different things. So how can you involve them? How can you involve them in the validating process? How can you involve them in helping you to capture and making sure that you don't put children under stress so that basically they do things at the time when they're ready? Another question really is about the flexibility to create ensembles for all. So one of the things that I know happens in some of the schools our partnership works with is that, well, and I've had the same situation myself, sometimes children are just really reluctant to do a ensemble performance. They just like playing what they like playing. So as a teacher, how willing are you to just grab whatever it takes and make up the other part and make it into an ensemble for them, around them, whatever that may be, and then do whatever you need to do to make it work. So I think, you know, there's a lot that we can do to help children be musical without saying, and here's a piano duet, because you need two people. And then what about the technology, the realising and the improvising? And what does that mean to all of the different people who you may be able to drag into a GCSE who may not be there at the minute? So in a nutshell, that's some of the key differences and similarities between the specifications. I'm going to hand over to Kirsty.
Okay, thank you, Ali. There's a lot to get through. And I'm going to be talking about sort of the different approaches that the exam boards have taken, but also the different approaches to the briefs, which I think are really interesting, coming from a composition background as well. You know, looking at these briefs and trying to unpick them and trying to imagine sort of how would this happen with young people, you know, and personally, how would I, if I was given this brief, what would I do? Would I sort of freak out, or would I, you know, how does it stimulate ideas? So I'm really fascinated by the briefs, actually. But basically, I want you to think of sort of what is going to, you think will work for your students. Obviously, you know them a lot better than I do. I don't know who they are. But also how the composing can be meaningful for them, but also enjoyable. I know quite the common thing I hear from young people is, oh, I can't compose, or I hate composing. So, you know, looking at ways that we can make it an enjoyable experience and meaningful to them as well. So I'm going to look at the variations and look at as well about how it's assessed, because that's a little bit different as well. What do they maybe focus on? And then about a little bit about supervised time. Ali might be able to chip in a little bit as well, because some of it it's a little bit blurry, but it's kind of figuring it out as well. So basically, as we know, it's 30% of the award for GCSE, and it's that eternally assessed, externally moderated thing, coursework type area, and basically we need to produce two pieces in GCSE. So one is a brief that's set by the awarding body, a set of briefs which students will pick from a variety. The minimum amount is 4, so they can pick from 4 up to, well, we'll talk about OCRs briefs in a second, about all the varieties that might entail. And the other one is a free composition, free composing choice by the candidate. So each brief will contain details of an audience and the role of the audience and the role of the piece, and a possible occasion as well. So I think that was set that exam boards needed to detail audience and occasion in that way, which is interesting, because as a composer, you know, if you just compose by yourself and you don't think of an audience, or no one's going to, you know, who is going to listen to your music? Is it going to be online? Is it going to be performed? Yeah, so it's an interesting approach. Briefs will be released in September of the year the course will be completed, so year 11 probably, likely, and the minimum time of length is 3 minutes in total. Recording and scores are needed, and a score is quite loose. That I'm not going to talk too much about it, because I don't think it's changed that much. But you know, it could be standard, you know, Sibelius, or it could be what the other thing,
like lead sheets
and where you just sort of describe what's happened in the piece, and if you're using logic technology. So it hasn't changed that much. It's you know, it's a wide the score means a wide variety of things. So the area, so compose and develop musical ideas with technical control and coherence, and that develop musical ideas crops up a lot in the marking criteria. So that could be something that we could maybe talk about, and if you've got any questions with that. So I'm going to go through each exam board. So we'll start with AQA. So it's 2 compositions, free composition and a brief, both 36 marks each. And the brief gives you some context in the stimuli. The pieces need to be a combined time of 3 minutes, and if it's less than 3 minutes, it's not accepted. Ali, do tell me if I'm wrong, but this is what I've heard.
So this is one of the things that may change because this is AQA.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, but basically at the moment, if it's 2 minutes 59 seconds, then you get 0 marks.
Yeah, at the moment, but it might change. So we'll keep an eye out. It suggests that 4.5 minutes maximum in length. No requirements for supervised time. But the thing that I've highlighted and underlined, bold, is the composing log. So it's talking a little bit about the composing process and how that's assessed. So I'll talk about that a bit more, but it's an interesting move for AQA and exciting as well. So I've given some examples of what briefs AQA have set. So like I said, they kind of give you a different stimuli and then a context. So if we take the first one, it says compose a piece of music that incorporates all of the following textures. So we've got 3 textures there. So it's quite specific, it's quite detailed, and then underneath it gives you your context. So the music should be linked to at least one or other art form such as dance or film and be appropriate for visuals as well as audio performance. So it kind of just gives you a little bit more to sort of think of, and sort of the bottom one as well. So it says that the music should be capable of reaching the intended audience through an appropriate audio recording such as CD, MP3 or internet download. So sort of it's realised sort of through electronic medium rather than a performance. Looking at that in a bit more detail, I think the first, for me, it kind of feels like 2 briefs smudged together like a little bit. So there's quite a lot to kind of think about as a composer, but it's quite specific and I think it's quite detailed. So it does kind of give up sort of different ideas and things like that. So I'd be interested in your comments as well to see what you think about how AQA have maybe approached their brief. There is always sort of a line in between, so you get the detail and then you get the context. And it'd be interesting to see how much they sort of impact each other. That's an interesting thing from me anyway. The free composing, there's no requirement for supervised time. It doesn't need to reference an area of study. And they may reference their own brief if they want. So they're quite hot on briefs. With AQA, they don't have to have a brief for their own free composition, but I get the idea that it might help in some way to have a brief, to have an idea. And we've got a question here or a comment.
Okay, so the question is asking whether the briefs showed were 2 separate briefs or the same, but actually they were 2 separate briefs.
Yeah, so it's 2 separate briefs there. So it was brief 1, I've cut it off. So which was about the textures, the monophonic, polyphonic, and then underneath it said about audio performance and the art form, and then I've got brief 2 underneath. So it was 2 different ones. Cool. Thank you for clarifying that. So the composing log, so that's significant sort of change. I'd be really interested to see how teachers find this and if they think it's helpful for their students. But it's something that I'm really interested in that it's kind of unpicking the composing process and gaining marks, so students can gain marks for reflecting on their composing process. And here it says that students at 3 separate times in the composing process, so at the beginning, in the middle and at the end, need to reflect on their decisions, so their decision making, which is a big part of composing, kind of what composing is, it's about making decisions, and then reflecting on why they made them decisions and how it's changed. And then this can be used it'll be used for evidence, but also it will also be part of the marking as well. So here, AQA at the moment, unless this changes, so you have, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 sixes. So it splits it up quite specifically, and then at the bottom, so you can get 6 marks for just the composing log for reflecting, which can be quite good. Me and Ali were talking about this. If you have a student that is struggling with the composing, then at least you know if they are reflecting on their choices and their struggles and how they're working, they might be able to get a good 6 marks from just that. What was interesting with the AQA marking criteria as well is they're quite specific. So for each of the categories here, rhythm and meter, texture and melody, harmony and tonality, I've given you at the bottom here an example of what it says. So it says here, it is expected that a minimum of 4 of the following techniques will be evident. So I've here put changing, meter, compound, augmentation, diminution, cross rhythm, syncopation. That's quite specific. That's like a list of things, and then if that's for like top marks, minimum of 4, and then it goes down to a minimum of 3 and then a minimum of 2, which I think would help. It is quite detailed in the marking, but I do worry that it may just become, oh, well, okay, I use syncopation, mark, tick. Oh, I use augmentation, tick. So there is a little worry, I feel, that it might become, because it is so detailed in that way. But I think it's good to see where sort of the line is for the assessment in that way. Cool, so WJEC, just check the time, we're kind of running on time, it's not too bad. So here, yeah, again, 2 compositions and a choice of 4 briefs, and they are specifically linked to the areas of study. And for the free composition, they have to have their own brief, so that's different from the AQA.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting things about the new GCSE on the composing front, though, is the fact that the free composing is back in there.
Oh, yeah.
Because actually it used to be there years ago, and I think it gives children complete kind of ownership and choice over what they're doing. So I think we were both quite excited to see that, and I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of singer-songwriters re-emerging.
No, definitely. When I did GCSE, I had the free composing in, and it was it's a very important. Actually, overall, GCSE composing is incredibly important. If you speak to many of the composers that are working today, they will say, if you ask them, when did you start composing? How did you get into it? They will say, GCSE composing. I started, and I found out I really loved it. So it's actually really important, and that is how I, got through, and I'm now working as a composer and trying to earn money, but getting there. So, it is really important. So that free composing is an important area. Just got a question here. So students allowed to submit pieces created outside the school. So that is to do with sort of supervised time. So not purely out of school.
Basically, the teacher has to authenticate the work which is going on, and they have to know that the work is the student's own. And as a teacher, you would know that, because if somebody came in one week, Duncan, it's Duncan Chapman who's just sent us the question.
Oh, hi, Duncan. I didn't
notice. And they've got a piece which really wasn't very developed. Then fine, if they came back the next week and they'd done something absolutely wonderful that you knew them quite well as a musician, and you thought, oh, actually, perhaps we could unpick that a little bit. So it's about the teacher being able to authenticate the composition, as they have to with the performance, obviously, as well, but that's slightly different because they're there. Could the free composition be in the same style as the brief set by the composition? That's a really interesting question from Emily. But actually, I don't think there's any reason why it couldn't be, because it doesn't say, it just says it can be your free choice about what you do.
Yeah, I mean, some like WJEC, you will have to set your own brief in that way, but they're a little bit, there's a little bit of a difference. So anyway, okay, so we'll carry on with WJEC and shout if you've got any more questions. So the whole submission, when the whole submission under 3 minutes, 1 mark must be deducted from the total mark for every 30 seconds under time.
So that's nearly 3% of the mark, for 1 mark out of the 36. So that's something to bear in mind.
Yeah,
I'm sure repeat marks might be useful in that
case. Repeat. No. Never copy and paste. Anyway, never mind. Anyway, so and then we've got here, when a candidate does not respond to a brief set, the composition must be awarded 0. And they talk a little bit about that in a little bit more detail. And then there's no restriction for the amount of time learners spend, so that's a good one. So the WJEC briefs are specific with the area of studies that they've got, that Ali talked about earlier. So we've got area of study 1, which we'll talk about musical forms and devices. Area of 2, musical ensembles. 3, film music, 4, popular music. And also they provide a list of devices. So I've given you an example of some of the area of devices which link back to one of them 4. And again, I think that might be a really nice way to start. You know, if you decide, oh, I'm going to choose this area of study, and you just think, oh, blank page moment. What do I do? You know, you could do some listening, but also maybe look at some of these devices and think, oh, which ones could, you know, there's just to help stimulate some ideas. Or if they've started a piece and they've kind of got to a certain point, you know, maybe some of these words or looking into some of these devices might be quite useful. And it is a long list, but again, there is a worry that, oh, okay, I've got an intro and a chorus, I've got an instrumental and a solo, I've got an improvisation and bridge. You know, it's not a tick list, but I think it could be used quite creatively in that way. So WJEC, they need to set their own briefs, and the brief won't be assessed, but they will be assessed based on their responses to the brief. I hope that makes sense. So the brief itself isn't assessed, but it's the response that is assessed. So that's kind of the main thing. There will be a composition log, but that isn't assessed like AQA. And there's a template provided on the website.
That's, I think, because one of the criteria for the new GCSE is that the process, hello, I'm back, the process has to be acknowledged as part of it. And this was something that the stakeholders felt was very important. I sat on the stakeholders group. We didn't have very many wins, but I think the free composing and the process was the biggest win of the lot.
That's big. That's quite a big win.
Yeah,
I'd be happy with that. So there's a little bit about the criteria, the marking criteria. Quite interesting. You know, they do actually have that word creativity in there, which is nice. So it's nice that maybe is being looked at. Development of musical ideas, that keeps cropping up quite a lot. Something to be aware of.
Here's Duncan's point, actually, that the teachers must see the work in progress to authenticate the work as the learner's own, because you'll know them and you'll get a feel for it.
Yeah. So OCR, as I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but OCR, the free composition in this one is for their own instrument, which is, did they do that in the previous one? Something similar? Similar,
but the thing about this is that that's very flexible. Their own instrument can be absolutely anything at all.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely, whatever that is. And they call that the integrated portfolio, so that's performing and composing for their instrument. And then the board set compositions as well. There is no creative task in OCR as well, so that's an interesting point to add. And some of the briefs here, this is the interesting. Well, they're all interesting, but I found this one quite fascinating in that what you have to do is you have to choose an area of study, which is the one on the left. So the concerto through time, rhythms of the world, film music and pop, conventions of pop. And then you've got a whole list of 8 starting points, 8 stimuli. So a choice of 2 rhythms, 2 note patterns, a 4-line stanza, chord sequence, a short story and an image. And I've got some examples here. You might have seen them if you've looked through. And I just think, you know, there's so many possibilities with this. But I think it's really exciting to think of how they kind of link up. So if I go back to the first one, basically there could be loads of different approaches. So if you pick film music, and we go over here, so we have sort of a wave picture, or we have a bit of a narrative, but that would also really link well to maybe the start of a song if it was pop, a concerto through time, so we could be looking at narrative. So it's really interesting, like we could get a lot of different variations with the pieces, the outcomes, quite free.
We did some things with our PGCE group a couple of weeks ago where we took those and we just improvised around them, and actually it was a very, very lovely way to start things off. Something that you might want to consider doing in your class, because one of the things Kirsty and I were talking about is how hard it is for young composers when they go into year 10 and they're used to doing all this lovely group work in Key Stage 3, and then suddenly everything is on your own. So finding ways around that with those briefs is really quite fun.
Yeah, I think it could be, you know, really creative with how you approach them briefs as well, and with your students working together and creating music together as starting points. It could be really lovely. So we've talked about the free composing element for the OCR for their own instrument. And the marking criteria here, just a little bit of an overview of what they look at. So intentions, developing material, stylistic convention, structure, and then a mark out of 6 for the area of study criteria as well. So how they respond to the brief. That seems to be coming up quite a lot as well. So developing ideas and how they respond to a brief is quite important. Final one, Edexcel. So the briefed composition links again to the area of study, and there's one free composition, a minimum of 1 minute. I think that's, and here we've got 5 hours minimum in centre under supervision of teacher. So what I interpreted that as is that the final write-up and the recording of the composition, whether that's live or I guess on the computers as well, has to be under supervision. So they're a little bit more particular with that, with what is being supervised. So here are the examples of some of the briefs. So again, it's the area of study. So the first one, instrumental music. So here's some possible things that they may start with: vocal music, so some words for voice and accompaniment, music for stage and screen, and then some examples there, and then fusions as well underneath as well. So they're just some examples. The free composition, there's a little bit more detail with this, and then at the bottom it says the student should consider the role and/or occasion. So again, kind of big on briefs. And then the marking criteria for this. So they're going to break it down into 3 sets of 10. So developing a musical idea, demonstrating technical control, and composing with musical coherence. Yeah, and that's it. They seem to be quite hot on sort of genre and style of music. Whatever you think of that. Okay, so that's sort of my end of that bit. So some things to consider that Ali spoke about as well is think of ways of creating sort of a creative composing community, so working together, peer support, feedbacking as groups, and trying out ideas very practically. Like Ali said, sometimes when we get into year 11, you know, kind of like, oh right, you're a composer now, you've got to compose, and you sit by yourself. So thinking of ways that we can ease that transition. Yes, the piece has to be written by themselves and composed by themselves, but you know, you could have start simulating ideas all together and things like that, which would be really nice. Think of developing musical material is quite important. So maybe thinking of tasks to help students develop ideas, and maybe think of our students exploring their own musics and their own ideas and being creative. Or some of the tasks, is it a bit more pastiche, and what are students getting out of that? So just having to think of what the briefs and things are asking students to do. Are they asking them to be creative?
Kirsty, we've got a question here from Liam saying, is there an element of a log with the Edexcel composition?
I think they all have some sort of log. It's only Edexcel, no, AQA that is assessed and looked at, but there is evidence, things that need evidencing and under supervision and things like that. So,
okay, I think that comes back to that point, Liam, about how the process has gained more significance in the marking. So we're going to we've also put together some charts for you to kind of compare all these things which are on the materials which I pointed you to at the beginning. But we're going to move on to have a look at the examination requirements, because 40% of the GCSE will be around an examination. And so I kind of wanted to make you aware of the things here which are the givens, if you like, by Ofqual and the DFE, and what they're expecting. So analysing and evaluating music in an oral and or written form using knowledge and understanding of musical elements, musical context and musical language. And those 3 things, the knowledge, the understanding and the musical elements and the context and the language, are the things which come up all the way through. And I think you can see, I hope, that through a kind of a very rich composing and performing experience, that a lot of the things that you might need as knowledge of, knowledge how, knowledge why, knowledge about, all of that kind of stuff actually comes through. Liam, I'm going to come back to your question. I noticed there's a question there about OCR, but we will come back to that afterwards. Yeah, so basically, there's a list within each of the specifications, which is based on a very extensive list really given by the DFE about what is supposed to be there and the kind of language that has to be there. And as I was saying at the very beginning, there is a need to analyse unfamiliar music, which actually I think is great, because I think, you know, the thought of teaching to the test. I know one school that has a certain amount of pieces of music from one of the current specifications, which they use across their entire curriculum from year 7 onwards. So it doesn't give them a very rounded experience of music education. So actually, it seems a lot more musical to me to be able to pick out the things, you know, in all sorts of types of music. So they're supposed to make critical judgments about music. Sometimes the critical judgments in the papers are about the music itself, and other times it's about the kind of how, there's one question I saw in one of the drafts about how does the music make them feel, or what do you like about it or not like about it. So aesthetic judgments, I suppose, as well as critical judgments.
I think as well, the composing logs that they're possibly doing as well, they're being critical on their own work as well, which helps, I think, being, you know, understanding other music and being critical in that way as well.
I think also if you thought about all the kinds of things they want, so here's a paper and just some examples. They want to know about whether you can tell the difference between staccato, sustained notes, ostinato, sequences, glissando, repetition, rhythm and meter, time signatures, whether it's conjunct, ascending or disjunct. All of these kinds of things actually relate very much to the music which they are performing and composing themselves. So if, as a teacher, and you can help get the instrumental staff as well that you may work with into the habit of trying to pull out those things actually from their own music to help them understand it. In other words, getting to the music from the inside out, then it doesn't become just a knowledge exercise, which actually, I have to say, one of my biggest worries is this 40% could just be a kind of a very dry experience. So that's the kind of givens, I suppose, within the Dfe requirements. And so in a way, there are kind of less differences in some of the papers than there are in the practical parts. I suppose one of the key things, though, is if you look down this chart here, you can see that the Welsh Board exam is only 1 hour and a quarter. And the longest one, the Edexcel Pearson, is 1 hour and 45 minutes. So actually there's a huge amount of difference there as to how long the actual examination takes, how many questions there are, whether they're based on set works, and then how they link to the kind of the unknown, unheard, previously unheard parts. So each one of these specifications is definitely going to have some kind of questions which are based on music which hasn't been heard before. And looking through all of the draft papers, again, when I was working in Brighton and Hove with the instrumental teachers a few weeks ago, we went through all of the papers and we kind of ripped them apart and looked at all the different skills that you might need across the boards, and unsurprisingly, they're very, very similar. I suppose one of the key things I wanted to pick out is that there will be some kind of, not extended writing, but slightly longer answer questions, and that seems to come up in the draft papers which they put out at the moment as well. And what they're asking in those is that there is an option for children to be able to really write in quite a lot of detail about the music, and so to kind of hit the higher marks. This one here, the Edexcel GCSE draft paper, hold up my specimen. This talks about, makes points about, this is for the last question, where they have to compare two questions on an area of study, one heard and one unheard. They make points about both extracts. They fully support it with evidence, that they demonstrate stylistic awareness of both pieces, that they use extensive and sophisticated musical language, that they appraise in a way which presents a coherent and critical argument of both pieces. So being able to discuss and to write and to kind of get into all of the differences between them and be able to make quite sophisticated statements about them is the thing that is going to get you, certainly on the Edexcel paper there, the higher marks. When we went through the papers, in a way, there were no surprises. They were all the kinds of things that you would expect to see and hear from the traditional listening papers which we've had to this point, I would say. There's bits of dictation, sometimes rhythmic dictation, sometimes the melodic dictation. And so I think those are things which you kind of need to be aware of, and those are things which you would presumably be building up through music from a very early age anyway, because if you ask children what way da 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 da, they can tell you with their hand which way it's moving. You know, they inherently know some of these things. but one of the big things about this is that some of the questions are quite notation heavy, I would say. So although with the performing and the composing, you don't have to link it necessarily to notation, with the listening paper, there is more of a need, if you like, to be able to read at least some notation to be able to get all of the marks. But much the same as before, to be able to identify cadences. It kind of makes me laugh. I think it's you have to go up to 4 sharps and flats for GCSE. It's either 5 or 6 for AS level, and then all of them for A level, which I love the idea of teaching half a circle of fifths. But basically, key signatures will come in, but do stop when you get halfway around the circle, because this is only a GCSE. So yeah, there's likely to be questions on things like that. But if you go to all of the websites, they've all got draft specification papers on there. And of course, in the sense the first time this happens, when you start in 2016, that is your guinea pig year, I'm afraid. There's always one cohort of children to which this happens. So I think those are kind of critical things to pick out from this. Now, Liam's question, before we finish, I'm just going to pick that up before I just go to the last few slides. We're very quickly chugging towards the end. Yeah. So with the OCR, are the weak performers not being hit twice by the need to compose on their instrument? Kirsty?
I think it's a really interesting question in that personally, I think as a composer, your imagination is so much more than your ability to be able to play, unless you're a really great performer. But even then, I imagine things that I will never be able to play. I'm a pretty average piano keyboard player. I can sort of get my notes and my chords, but actually my imagination for sound is more interesting than what I can play. So I don't think they have to record their own piece, composition, but they can explore their instruments in different ways. What different sounds can they make, and what different techniques, even if they can't play the techniques properly, like they can't quite get a really resonant pizzicato on their violin, or they can't quite do that chord strum on the guitar. They can still imagine these things and write them down, and get their teachers to try and just even if you just come with a set of ideas like, can you just play that note and do it like this on that string, or can I sing in this, can you teach me how to sing in a certain way? So use their imagination, really, I would go for.
And also I would say bring in the community of people who work as musicians in your school, and that's other young people as well as other teachers. And some of the most exciting composing things I've seen have been where young people have been going, I want you to do this on your instrument, just try it out and see what it sounds like, and actually having that experience of knowing. So the position with all of them is that they don't have to actually record their own. They do have to realise it in some way, and they have to be able to show the examiner what their intention was, and there has to be, and there is, flexibility within the marking schemes that, okay, if the realisation doesn't quite work out and they've managed to explain perfectly well what they intended, then it's their intentions. We are always really stuck in music because I think we go a lot for, oh, well, I'm judging somebody's ideas by how well they perform it. And that's, praise to the mark schemes in the sense that they're trying to get away from that being the case. So I hope, Liam, that answers your question on that. We're just going to move to the last few bits. Basically, on the end of these slides here, I've put just some links for you about different qualifications, which are either currently out or coming out. I was invited to the OCR Creative Arts Forum a couple of weeks ago, which I went to on behalf of the ISM. And that was really interesting because they've got some new Cambridge Nationals in Creative iMedia, as they're called, coming out. They've got some different qualifications for 14 to 16 and also for 16 to 18, some of which are at level 2 and some of which are level 3. And they're just being considered at the moment for the technical guidance so that they can go, as I showed you at the beginning with the pots, you need to work out, at the time when they come out. But I think, having spoken to Jackie at OCR yesterday, that they're coming in for September 2017, which will be really, really exciting. And they've also got this level 3 qualification coming in. We've got some other things on here. Let me just see what that says. the DFE technical guidelines. If you're really interested in this, it kind of shows you which bits are done by the exam boards and which bits are given by Ofqual, and you know which decisions they made. And actually there are some things which they could have made decisions on but they chose not to, and there were other things where their hands were completely tied. So before you kind of get angry and annoyed, I suggest go and read the technical guidelines if you want to know much more about it. So it tells you a little bit there about the different things. I'm going to give a quick plug. So Martin, who works with Kirsty, and I have put together some assessment guidance for primary and for secondary. They're both available on this link at the bottom. This is my plug, www.ism/national curriculum. Our web resources are very easy to find. The GCSE ones, Alison, I know you've just joined us at www.ism.org/GCSE. We have a similar comparison for A-level, which is /A-level. So they're quite easy for you to get your hands on. The slides from today will run alongside the webinar, which will be uploaded. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. If you have any specific questions, then each of the awarding bodies has their own technical people who are actually on a sales mission, I think might be the word, at the minute, trying to work out their market share. And I suggest that from today you look and see, which one is best for you, which one is best for your kids. There are some subtle differences, but they could make a huge difference in which ones are going to be suitable. So yeah, I think it's probably over and out. Do you think, Kirsty?
Yeah, good luck with choosing. And yeah, I hope all goes well, especially with your composing and seeing how students respond in that way.
So specific thank you to Kirsty, Shirley, who's joined us from the Falkland Islands. Wow.
That's great.
That's quite a long way away. And just the last thing to say is that once the specs are finalised, then we will be updating the information on the website and pulling out some of these key differences for you. So do keep your eye on there.
And keep an eye on for the AQA.
Yeah, and well, if you go on my free plug to the download and put your details in there, then you'll be on the mailing list, I guess, for stuff to come out next time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.